Welcome everyone who's at the event today. I must really start by congratulating Dr. Nitin Bazirani and his leadership, and indeed the students who put this event together. I think it's incredible for you to own this agenda. And I think one of the reasons why you have so many practicing professionals who have willingly given their Saturday morning to come in and speak at this event is because this event, this agenda belongs to the youth. This agenda is not of the future, it's of the present, it's of the current times. And it's important for all of you, especially as you're stepping out of business schools and will eventually have the power and responsibility to make a difference. You do even right now, even as students. And I think it's extremely important for you to evangelize and lead this agenda. And I'm delighted that you took the effort to be able to create a platform such as this and invite so many practitioners to come in and share their perspectives and their ideas here with you today. So I'm going to start on that note and, with that, ask my colleague Rupali to be able to help me share the screen. I'm afraid, a reality check in my presentation here today. And I did hear the speaker ahead of me, and I'm glad that besides explaining the agenda to you, he sounded incredibly hopeful, which you really need to be even as you go through the presentation that I have here for you today. So my topic is diversity and inclusion, moving from tokenism and compliance to culture and impact. And to try and take this agenda forward, I'm going to start by sharing with you, my choreography. Of course, Sean's done a great job with it, so I'm going to skip that and go straight to how this scenario, how does diversity and inclusion look in India today. So the India story. There are all kinds of diversities there on the screen, so I'll try and kind of give you a sense on what is the kind of a reality check, current reality to do with each kinds of diversities. So gender, which is obviously our low-hanging fruit on diversity because it's literally 50% of the population. A lot of women are educated; they're available in the talent pool. And so clearly most organizations tend to focus on gender diversity. In fact, for many, the understanding of diversity and inclusion is to be able to include gender. And there's sort of short of lack of understanding in terms of the other kinds of diversity. So we'll kind of do a quick reality check on all kinds of diversities as we speak today. So clearly on female labor force participation, we're one of the lowest in the world. And we are at 26% against a global average of 49%. Women typically come into the workforce. We have an increase in an improvement in the number of women who are educated. So there is a move to be able to bring them into the workforce. The government has been doing it for a very long period of time. But when they come in, there is a challenge because up to 30% perhaps is the diversity you see in the junior band, which typically with great difficulty converts into 15% at the mid-management levels and as low as 4% in the senior management levels. So we have a clear leakage in the pipeline, very educated women who come into the workforce but don't stay on. And this is because of societal expectations, the larger patriarchal mindsets we have around women, whether educated or not, and the expectation, perhaps the overburdening of expectation in terms of caregivers, primary caregivers within families, and especially as women are trying to navigate their life transitions to getting married, motherhood, and giving care to other elderly people within the family, which invariably falls on their lap. There is a huge leakage in the pipeline and attrition. So even if you do kind of bring women into the workforce, it's very difficult to be able to convert them into senior leadership positions. There's a whole host of factors that contribute to that, and we'll talk a bit about that in a bit. Most organizations don't have career advancement programs for women as a result, or because of certain factors which we'll talk about in a bit, and as a result of which you have very few conversions in senior management levels. India ranks 153 out of 166 countries on the Gender Development Index. We're lagging behind. We'll talk a bit more about this in a bit. We've had some landmark judgments, both in the gender diversity space as well as in the LGBTQ space, despite which this kind of a passive response, most organizations not quite understanding how to integrate this talent pool, this because of social taboos and embarrassments and all kinds of other challenges associated with coming out. This is not a large talent pool that is available. There is a struggle within organizations to be able to figure how do you really attract LGBTQ candidates if you're not from the media or the film or the sort of fashion industry. How do you still find professionals who are LGBTQ? And the agenda really lies inside the organization and not so much outside, because one of the factors that clearly we are missing in this melee of wanting to perhaps look for opportunities to integrate the LGBTQ community is that we got to actually first create cultures inside organizations for people to be able to come out. A lot of the LGBTQ communities are inside organizations. You don't really need to look for many of them outside, but the taboo continues. The opportunities are few and far between, and most organizations are lost on how to create environments of sensitization and respect and equality and inclusion for members of the LGBTQ community. Generational diversity, this is literally at the cynosure of attention of marketeers. Young people, people love talking about Gen Y and the millennials. You are a very significant group that marketeers cater to, and the media caters to. Having said that, within organizations, there is little or no understanding on what it really means to integrate 4 generations at work. And so, as we speak, we've got Boomer, you've got Gen X, you've got Gen Y, and you've got Millennials, and you already have the Gen Z coming in. Clearly, this agenda involves culturally how it is that these 4 or 5 generations can actually integrate, collaborate, and work effectively with each other. This agenda is about understanding more than misunderstanding. This agenda is about understanding how differently similar these generations really are. So little or not much work in this space at all, except for move to want to integrate young talent by bringing them on board. So really, it's largely in the representation space. What we do see in post-COVID-19 is a tendency to want to empower people down the line. We've been compelled to do that, really. And so greater opportunities in terms of high potential development or identification of talent down the line, greater empowerment, more movement to be able to integrate voice down the line. A lot of things that the millennials and the Gen Z are looking for in terms of contributing to creative problem solving and innovation inside organizations. The socio-cognitive diversity. Now, I must try explaining because, for most people, the diversity and inclusion, like I said, starts and finishes with gender diversity. So I'm talking about socio-cognitive diversity, which is the need to want to move beyond organizational diversity, which is the difference that already comes because you have different functions and different age groups, to move beyond that, to really want to bring in people who do not have the same educational background, perhaps, or the kind of lifestyles, perhaps, or the kind of careers, perhaps, like the people inside your organization have. And there was a very strong move, and some organizations, very few and far between, continue doing this, which is deliberately hiding, difference into the organization. By and large, we continue to be affinity oriented. We repeat, the same tricks that we've used in the past. Very, very little appetite for experimentation, and I dare say that that's shrunk even further post COVID-19. Especially able diversity. Now, this is really a space that requires huge attention, huge amount of work, because the census reports about 5% specially able people in our country, whereas there are various other bodies that have also made attempts at researching this space in India, and their suspicion is that the number is actually about 15%, which means 15% of our population are specially abled in some form or the other. And you may ask, why is there a difference between what the census reports and otherwise? Again, there is shame, taboo associated with admitting that you have specially abled children in the family. A lot of these people are hidden from the society. They are not counted for, and pathetically, they don't get included also in the census. So they are persons non gratas. They don't get included as individuals. And so when you say 15%, this is including essentially specially abled people who are also in the aging category. So these are aging people who also have specially abled situations or challenges with with essentially physical capabilities. Um, so this is basically a non-available talent pool. They're very few and far between. It needs to be developed. We need employers to be able to work closely with NGOs and other bodies that are doing work with being able to build capabilities in this space. Having said that, there's some hope because I saw through COVID-19 some of the organizations using the work from home situation well to be able to expand the talent pool around especially able, because they don't now need to commute, they don't need to come physically to a workplace. A lot of those challenges of navigating the workplace itself have gone away, and very astutely some woke organizations have done a fantastic job, particularly in the IT space, expanding the opportunity to be able to integrate specially able. So I've kind of given you a sort of snapshot, and I'm hoping even as you're listening and taking in all this is not sounding very encouraging. It's bleak. I've tried giving you a mix of what is indeed working, but what is indeed working is very little. It's very delayed, and it requires a lot of work. Which thankfully there are still organizations which are work in progress. I understand from Sean that there are some Amazon vouchers going out to best questions. So I'm going to ask you to continue posting your questions as I go along so that I'm able to take these questions, and hopefully some of you are going to win those Amazon vouchers. Let's come back to gender diversity, and I want to now focus on gender and tell you about what our situation is. We are 140th out of 156 countries overall rating on the World Economic Forum's global gender parity gap. We are 151 out of 156 countries on the Economic Participation and Opportunity Index. We are 114, little more encouraging, out of 156 countries on education attainment. But as you can see, we're a laggard country, and some of you may wonder because the optics around this. I'm sure I can see a lot of female participants here, and you're all empowered enough to come in and pursue an MBA program. So I must say that the optics around this, especially what you see in the media, what you see in terms of people who win awards, or women, who feel empowered and have opportunities, these are too few and far between. And you will, if you watch really closely, see the same names come up again and again, and a lot of all of that. But this is a very small number, and so I often get people ask me that the optics around this don't add up because I see a lot of women employed, and that is the other challenge that we have, which is in this 26% representation that we're talking about in the workforce. A lot of women are in administrative jobs and in service jobs, and as a result of which you can, if you go to check in on a counter to be able to fly to any destination, or you're trying to check into a hotel, you're most likely being served by a woman. And so therefore the optics around this are really misleading. Not only are they too few and far between, there is a huge scope to be able to actually improve this number. We lagging way behind the rest of the countries. Do not imagine that all these countries ahead of us are from the developed world. There are a lot of developing world countries which are way ahead of us. We also score really poorly even as compared to Southeast Asian countries. So if you want to compare with Malaysia or Singapore, or you want to compare with some of the other, China and the rest of that, we're lagging behind all these countries. So there's a lot of work to be done, and clearly during COVID, women were the worst affected. The ones who already employed drop out of the workforce because of the 24/7 on expectation that is there in various organizations, in many organizations on work from home, with having an unfair burden on handling household responsibilities, with next to impossible for a lot of them to continue contributing in the workforce, and so many of them dropped out. So we've had a huge erosion of women empowerment and women participation in the workforce during 2019. We dropped from 26% to 20% during the COVID times, during 2020. This is now recovered in some organizations and gone up. So there is some degree of work happening in the space within organizations, the realization that because the nature of work, the nature of what was being expected to work from home, it was becoming extremely difficult for women to continue working. There has been another phenomena, a very sort of depressing development during COVID times, which was in fact called the shadow pandemic, which has increased in the instance of domestic violence against women during the pandemic. So again, the degree of disempowerment continues, and we had almost 3 times the number of complaints to the Indian Council of Women, and this continued through COVID times, continues in very significant ways as women find themselves trapped with their predators. The third box talks about recovery, and I'm delighted to let you know the last couple of months have been really very positive, particularly in the IT space, where there's a huge demand for women. There are a huge number of jobs. This has gone up very dramatically during the last quarter. A lot of second career opportunities for women who took a career break to take care of their families. So there is a huge call out for returning women to be able to come back to the workforce. The hirers of diversity candidates, are typically still large major companies. The mid-size organizations and the small-size organizations still have a huge amount of catching up here to do. So let's try and look at how this agenda unfolds inside organizations. Who calls out this agenda? Who's in charge of this agenda? Why is this agenda being adopted within organizations? So they're different starting points or genesis of this agenda within various organizations. Several times this is a board agenda, and it's part of upholding the United Nations sustainability goals. And so there is a move to be able to want to become and live and manifest the equal opportunities employer value proposition. And as a result, a move to be able to say, can we try and become a more contemporary organization by offering opportunities to diverse candidates. Now, that diverse candidate for most organizations is women, like I said, and therefore a lot of organizations believe that their diversity and inclusion agenda starts and ends with being able to integrate a few women. So, like I said, board, it could also for MNCs emanate from their international headquarters, where there is a paradigm of wanting to become an equal opportunities employer everywhere in the world. And so, therefore, the need to be able to widen the talent pool, bring in diverse candidates, and create an environment that is inclusive, where there is work around conscious, unconscious biases, where there is no discrimination against the various diverse groups that are coming in fact, no discrimination against anyone, and to be able to create these environments where you kind of work on biases like affinity, which is where there is a tendency to hire more of the same, or there is an sort of aversion to any form of difference. And the difference would include not wanting women on board, or not being used to seeing women assert power, or not being used to seeing women in positions of decision making. And so to do a lot of work in that space so that you kind of become more woke, more inclusive as an organization. So typically for a lot of MNCs, this is an international-led agenda, and it's part of being able to be a particular kind of employer who reaps the benefit, the impact of diversity and inclusion. And the first speaker was also talking about this, which is that the research shows that over a protracted period of time, organizations that integrate diverse talent experience increase in revenue, increase in shareholder returns, the talent pools are widened, you can build bigger talent pipelines, more kinds of people are available to you because you think differently around talent. There is increased retention, and there's enough evidence to show that engagement levels go up, retention goes up, there is more fodder for problem solving, more perspectives for problem solving creatively, and also as a result of that, more innovation within organizations. And so, I think this is, again, another lure to want to sort of walk down the diversity and inclusion agenda. And I will not deny that a large number of companies want to keep up with the Jones. And so this is a nice, trendy bus to ride to be able to say, well, we're very contemporary. We also have diverse talent within the organization. Now, because the focus is representation, there is a tendency to be able to hand over this agenda in the good hands of talent acquisition professionals, which means it goes to HR. And this is also peppered with celebrating diversity and inclusion days, or perhaps Pride months, to be able to kind of symbolically create, awareness around diverse candidates and the organization's commitment to those kinds of diversities. Now, while that is is great, and it's a great starting point, and frankly, when it comes to the D&I agenda, any starting point is great. So if you're starting with awareness, you're starting with that, but that can't be the agenda itself. And so I have had, during the course of my work through the Women Leadership Forum of Asia and even otherwise, had very senior professionals, sometimes CEOs, talk in conversation around diversity and inclusion. And some of them turn around and ask, we've already got some women on board for the last couple of years, but we're not yet seeing all this, which we see in the research, increased revenue, increased innovation, and the rest of that. What's really going on here? Because, we have tried bringing in some diverse talent, and we're not yet seeing these outcomes. So it almost seems like some miracle needs to happen in between. First of all, the representation agenda is often contained to numbers. And even when you look at what are the D&I commitments being made within the organization, it's normally line managers taking up certain targeted numbers that they would hire, where they would bring in diverse talent into the organization. And this is where we kind of lose the plot in a way, because what we're very significantly missing is the whole piece on inclusion. So there is no direct conversion from just bringing diverse talent on board to seeing these wonderful outcomes in terms of, in all of them, if you look at it, increase revenue, increase shareholder return, increase talent pools. These are either related to goals which are to do with basically your business performance, they've got to do with business continuity, and most importantly, they've got to do with culture and innovation. So I'm going to talk a bit about inclusion, because that seems to be the part that is kind of lost in the story and is actually the most crucial, the most difficult part of diversity and inclusion, which is really to be able to create culture. So this is actually a culture change agenda. It's not about bringing in diverse talent. It's about being able to change your culture and making it ready for inclusion. This requires for lots of people to have the humility to be able to individually question deeply held values, beliefs, assumptions, and to question their own conditioning. Because a lot of the bias comes from essentially early childhood experiences, things that you heard from members in positions of authority, namely parents or namely teachers. As you've grown older, this has been the shortcut that you've taken to your thinking, because there are deeply embedded stories that you have about various diverse groups which get you to be able to interact and treat them sort of differently. And most of us, if this is not in our necessarily in our awareness domain, it could easily be on a blind spot. And so that is where these agendas often come unstuck. There is a huge confusion, I find, especially within organizations that are attracting gender diversity, where there's a huge confusion between chivalry and chauvinism. And this comes from coming collectively, where essentially still continue to manifest a patriarchal mindset. And so it's not surprising that more often than not, women get relegated to administrative roles. There is a huge difficulty in accepting them in positions of decision making, and you might claim that this is changing and this has changed and so on. And I think in some organizations it has. And they might, even if you have a program to be able to move people up within the organization, it does not mean that they're not experiencing a lack of acceptance, a lack of perhaps sort of conviction, respect around what it is that they have been offered to the organization. It's not uncommon, for example, and I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean when I'm saying that aren't environments for inclusion and this is work to be done, is that, we still have situations where women get labeled as diversity candidates within organizations. It's not uncommon for what you call office housework to be passed on to women. So, for example, in a meeting, it won't be uncommon for somebody very senior, who's typically a male leader, to turn over to somebody who's young and female to say, hey, why don't you take the minutes of this meeting? Or, oh, we're going to make a presentation at the end of it. I think Rupali is going to make the presentation for us today. So there is a tendency, also to be able to ask, for example, where is the coffee? And you turn to whoever is the woman on the table to ask, hey, we haven't got our coffee yet. Why don't you call for that? So, office housework. And this is something which it may not be deliberately done, and it's definitely not done to be able to disrespect any gender, but it's the way in which we typically relate to and interact with women. So creating lots of awareness around the fact that, you perhaps don't necessarily need to ask, for example, a woman to be able to do the housework, and it can be equally shared among everyone, is a paradigm shift, because in our society, we overburden women with unpaid work. There are huge challenges when women do get promoted, for there to be cooler conversations around the fact that the women who got promoted because they were women. And so it's not uncommon for male leaders to have women come up to them to ask, did I get promoted because I'm a female? And not because I'm competent or not because I'm contributing. So there are a lot of those challenges that we still continue to have within organizations. Most organizations do not have a serious career advancement program for women. So they might invest in training and development, but they don't really have a serious career advancement program. I've been part of so many career boards and the rest, and oftentimes if we have two male candidates and one female candidate, it's even rare to have one female candidate also compete along with two men for a senior leadership position. But let's say we have that. It is not uncommon after we finish interviewing all three candidates that there will be a turnaround to say, ye kar payegi kya? And so ye kar payegi kya is a phenomenon. We really sort of struggle with that. And what that simply means is, will she be able to lead other men? Would she be able to, and after a particular level within organizations, you're managing all kinds of stakeholders, and many of them are outside the organization. So we may still be able to protect her from internal stakeholders, but what do we do if she needs to interact with government, if she needs to be able to interact, with investors, with the, with tehsildar, with the sarpanch, which all of these people who are highly patriarchal and may not engage as positively. It is obviously in the space of doubt, but it is a serious doubt, and more often than not, women get pipped at the post for these positions because they're perhaps not seen as fit to be able to manage many other variables other than what needs to be delivered on the job. So inclusion, which is creating environments, which are where individuals, and especially this is a top-down agenda. It requires, it's not only, a moral agenda. It's not only a societal agenda. This is very significantly an agenda where you want women to become, or whoever are the diverse groups, to be able to become capable of being able to compete with the others and to be able to contribute to the organization, and participate in decision making, being truly empowered instead of just being there as diversity candidates. So deeply held values, beliefs, assumptions, reflecting on deep conditioning, and there's got to be some consequences for no action. So, for example, if there are groups of people who are not supporting the D&I agenda, there's got to be something the organization is doing about it, because in pockets it sort of never works. And therefore, investment in understanding what is our strategy, what is our roadmap with diversity and inclusion? Who should we entrust with the governance of diversity and inclusion within our organization? This can't be passion over competence. Very often this agenda is given to someone who says, oh, I feel for women empowerment, and that's not enough. It's got to be people who actually understand this, can work with people, our coaches, understand sensitization. During the COVID times, we've had so many instances of young people, millennials, coming out on the social media, and the employers floundering around trying to figure, well, how do we now manage this inside the organization, especially through work from home, when someone has already come out on social media? And we need to be able to manage the environment for this individual. We need to be able to create sensitization for this individual. We need to get the manager of this individual to be able to intervene positively. We need to intervene positively as employers. So you see, this requires a lot of work. It also requires a business case to be identified. Look at what impact we're talking about. We're talking about increased revenue. We're talking about increased shareholder return. We're talking about improved problem solving and innovation within the organization. So what is our business case for why we want to be able to integrate diverse talent? It can't be because we're keeping up with the Jones. It also can't be because someone told us to do this internationally. It also can't be because our boards asked us to do this. It's got to be something that we have great clarity on. It's not a goodwill agenda, and it's also not a best efforts basis agenda. And I think that is the space of work we still need to do, across India Inc. Compliance or culture, and I think this is another part which we cannot miss in the conversation, which is we've got a fair amount of legislation around being able to drive diversity and inclusion. It's not compulsory, it's not mandated, through the law to be able to have diverse and inclusive, cultures, or to hire diverse candidates. It's not yet been mandated, but you do have the Vishaka guidelines, and there is a huge challenge that we have, even the kind of reputation we have internationally, especially when it comes to women empowerment, harassment of women, and the rest of that. So we do have the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Policy and Act that came out in 2013, Prevention, Prohibition, Redressal. And you also have the Companies Act, which mandated having a female director on board. Now, I have to tell you, this is what happens when we look at compliance versus trying to build culture. Because basically, if you look at the sexual harassment of women at work, there's still work to be done in this space. And I'm not going to say that there are workplaces that are minus that, but by and large, this doesn't appear to be a sexual harassment problem. It actually appears to be a sexual behaviors problem that you really have as a dynamic between genders in organizations. What I mean by that is the kind and quality of conversations that are happening between men and women, which can be very offensive, can create a hostile environment for women. So even understanding that while it's great to have this policy, and maybe because you have the policy and you have a mechanism to be able to say that, well, we have a posh policy, we have a committee, and we have all the artifacts to be able to say we're serious about this. And if you have a problem, there is a mechanism for you to be able to complain about this. The real work in this space is around being able to sensitize the environment around sexual behaviors and the kind of informal conversation and banter between men and women, which can very significantly debilitate the experience of the workplace. And what I mean by that, I'll give you one or two examples. You understand what I'm talking about. It's not uncommon, for example, for women to be asked in informal conversations that why do you come to work? Is there a financial crisis at home? I mean, why do your parents allow you to travel all this way and come all this way to work? And so women get asked often, why are they at work? It's not uncommon during performance reviews for women to be told that you have a husband and your husband seems to be doing okay and you have two incomes. The men in our teams are essentially primary breadwinners, and while you've done great during this year, we're going to move your rating back to 3 instead of 4, and let some of the men have the 4 rating because they need to be able to earn the bigger bonus. And I believe you me, this is very common. And there is a conversation that happens in private to say, let the men get the higher ratings. Very much like, the environments where let us deploy greater resources on educating the men, because what do men do when they grow up? They work, they have a career. What do women do when they grow up? They get married and they have children. And so there is a tendency to ask women to step back, and this is in-person conversations. It's not uncommon to be able to want to compliment a woman who's looking good, but to say something uncanny and something unacceptable, right? Like, hey, you're looking like a hot babe today, or hey, you're looking really sexy today. And these things do happen, and they happen in fun and banter. But in the context of the experience of the organization, it's unacceptable. A lot of women, and naturally so, object to being trivialized, and not being taken seriously thereafter. Because of the kind of behavior that is acceptable sort of within the workplace to do with women. There are umpteen number of women who told me that they go to work with senior male bosses who will not look them in the eyes, who will look somewhere else while talking to them. And it's just simply because there is a lack of comfort in terms of being able to deal with women, and especially when women have come to be able to discuss business, to be able to discuss something important or to make a decision together. There is a high level of body language which is demonstrating discomfort in terms of being able to deal with women. So you see, this compliance piece is not a reflection of the reality of what it is that organizations actually need to work on. The mandated, woman on board, we've tried doing this ourselves. We had a situation where a very senior woman was put on board on one of the boards. So all other men and only one woman on the board. And after 2 quarters, so 2 meetings, the CEO reached out to us asking, what should we do? She does not say anything in any of the meetings. She signs wherever it is that we ask her to sign, but we've had 2 meetings with no contribution from the senior lady. She doesn't say a word. And so when we did reach out to her, we figured that she said there are very animated conversations in the room, people raise voices, and she feels extremely uncomfortable and does not feel safe to be able to speak up in the middle of all that noise. And later on, we decided to coach her because we wanted her to succeed. She was a very senior finance professional, and we were surprised because she was leading teams. Otherwise, we were surprised with this behavior on the board. And so during coaching, she submitted that she belonged to a very conservative family where typically women didn't speak up if men were animated or agitated. And she said that, I think it's that. And that comes back when I see this, and I find it extremely difficult to be able to intervene. So we have these challenges to be able to convert some of this compliance, into real work and real success stories within an organization. So clearly these are top down. It's about building top down cultures. It's about being able to build, high levels of, individual ownership for and accountability for questioning our own conditioning. a lot of the senior management buying in, not because it's morally right, not because it's socially desirable, but because they truly want to include diverse talent groups and enable their success stories. Um, so truly wanting to be able to build cultures for all. So here I want to talk a bit about the terminologies that get used very often when we're talking about diversity, and increasingly now it's not just diversity and inclusion, but diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I thought, because you're largely a student community, I'll try and kind of give you a sense on what do we really mean with these three terminologies. Diversity includes all the ways in which people differ. It's about encompassing the different characteristics that make one individual or group different from one another, right? So that difference is what we're trying to integrate through interventions of diversity and inclusion. Equity is the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people. So it's about having a spirit of wanting to be equal and fair for all, and for those who are marginalized to be able to bring them up to speed to enable them to compete. And inclusion is the act of being able to create environments where individuals or groups can be made to feel welcome, they're integrated, you create a sense of belongingness, and you create an opportunity for them to really bring their talent to work. I'm going to give you, an example here, especially around, because we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. On the back of a series of workshops I was doing for a senior management group, one of them reached out to me post the program. It was around leading with inclusion. And we do a lot of that through the Capstone organization. So this is a large multinational company, and one of them who were participants of the program reached out after the program to be able to have a conversation. And he said, Dr. Banerjee, I loved the session. I agree with everything that you talked about. And, I loved what we did through the AHA sort of activities. But here's what I have to say. And he said, I have to ask you this question. How do you guard yourself against the soft bigotry of low expectations when you're hiring diverse talent? And I'm going to repeat that. He said, how do you guard yourself against the soft bigotry of low expectations when you're hiring diverse talent? And I thought it was incredible for someone to ask this question, because everyone's very busy agreeing with this, because it's so kind of desirable to be able to be seen as woke, to say, of course, we want an equal opportunities place. We know as a country that we're wrought with so many kinds of divisions, in significant ones, and I don't need to call them out because you already know them. But he asked this question, and I, first of all, congratulated him for his candor, for asking. What he's asking in short is, what do I do about the fact that when I'm hiring somebody diverse, I don't actually expect much from them? And I'm bogged down with the thought that now we're going to have to make up for what this individual can't do or can't contribute. And he said, as a line manager, let's say I can hire only 10 people in my team, and you put in one woman there, and she's from the returnee program, which means she has 2 young children at work. We got to now brace ourselves to take on her part of the work, her share of the work, because we won't be able to do anything if she says she doesn't have house help tomorrow. Or we won't be able to do anything if she says one of the kids are unwell and she needs to stay back at work, or she can't attend work. And he says, so now all her problems and all her challenges have now become ours, and we got to rally around that, which simply means all of us have to work a little more, than because we've got her on board. And here's my response, and I want to, in my response, call out, equity in a way, so that you can understand what this really means and why is this an additional word here. So you see, if you hire a specially able person who's in a wheelchair, for example, and that was my answer to him. I said, if you hire a specially able person in a wheelchair, you straight away have to create ramps, starting from how the person is going to get into the workplace, and at different levels within the organization, you would have to create ramps so the person can reach those places. You got to try and figure how this person on a wheelchair is going to open a door, how is he going to get into, he or she is going to get to different parts of the organization. So you would create a ramp, and ramp is a metaphor for diverse groups. First of all, they're called diverse group because they're different. They're not the same as you. And the fact that they all deserve ramps, they want and they need those ramps. So in the instance of the woman who's coming on a returnee program with 2 young children, you have to be able, you're offering her support to be able to manage life transitions. And you'll find that many times, several times, and this has been invariably true, is that women who get support through these transitions actually end up becoming the most productive members in the team, are highly engaged, and stay with the organization longer. And I said, what you're perhaps actually building here is high levels of engagement. She'll come back and give more. And maybe she doesn't require as many ramps as you're imagining she really requires. But if you did support her through these ramps, you could actually have an incredible employee on hand who's actually going to contribute to your organization's agenda much more. So equity is the ability to be able to get people the kind of support they require. Now, let me give you another example of equity, which is a lot of the returnee programs have converted into organizations saying, hey, hang on a second. It's not just the women taking career breaks. There are a lot of men who are, single children, who are taking care of parents who are unwell, people who are unwell and maybe perhaps bedridden over a protracted period of time, all kinds of illnesses. Some of the men take career breaks because they need to manage other family challenges, perhaps legal matters. And so men also have reasons to be able to take career breaks. So we mustn't go on harping about these breaks that we see in CVs. Let's try and open up our returning program for men as well. So the great part about diverse and inclusive cultures is it sets up the virtuous cycle of compassion within organizations. And you suddenly become this employer who understands, who reaches, who doesn't just talk about engagement and does engagement surveys. You are actually causing that engagement and creating opportunities to be able to improve employee experience within organizations. So in short, for you to be able to remember, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, and equity is being able to select the playlist that you'd like to dance on. So remember it like that to be able to learn more about diversity and inclusion. I invite you on this journey of learning and contributing to creating and shaping a better world. And that is the responsibility all young people have within the society. So do everyone else. So I wish you luck. Thank you for listening to me. And again, one more time for the organizing committee and Dr. Nitin Vazirani, thank you for inviting me to be able to talk to you. So we have some questions here, and I'm wondering, are you going to let me answer them? Is there time, Sean, to be able to take some of the questions?
Sure, ma'am.
Okay.
We can take up a couple of questions, probably 4 to 5 questions. Probably we can take. We can engage for 5 minutes or 6 minutes.
Okay, all right. And so, I have hands up. So, are you going to allow people to unmute and speak? Sean?
Ma'am, Dr. Sumi would like to, address one. She would like to ask a question. So I'll allow ma'am to go first, and then probably we can ask the attendees to post it in the chat box, or if we have the time, we can take up the questions as well.
Okay, super. So I have Aman Prakash Gulabari asking, you spoke about women being uncomfortable in the organization, which I agree, but ma'am, don't you think when we talk about diversity, men also face issues? I have no corporate experience, but if what I sense is men cannot openly talk to women because of the fear that women might mostly accuse men, this is the ongoing issue in our society. So I would like to know your views on this and how do we tackle that? And this is what I mean when our focus is compliance. And there are a lot of organizations who go on brandishing this, the posh policy. So it's important to know that there are consequences for that behavior. But you're so right, it can't lead to a situation of fear and lack of psychological safety where men don't want to talk to the women anymore. That's counterproductive to the agenda completely. So I agree with you. And that's why I said it's better to talk to men and women together about sexual behaviors and the impact they could have, which are inappropriate from any side. Even if the women had those conversations with the men, they would be inappropriate. And this is what happens, when you're wearing the culture hat, then you're conducting the entire process very differently. And this, I believe that our society needs to come of age with men and women having many more conversations together on, because there is a dynamic, and it's a very healthy dynamic when you have men and women together. And there is a great attraction when you have men and women together. And I think it's important to make sense of that and convert that into power for collaboration. And I'm afraid I don't think there is enough maturity to be able to do this. And instead, there seems to be, inordinate investment of time in being able to celebrate, various kinds of diversity days and all, which can augment what you're doing. And I'm not denying that they are important to be able to create awareness, but it can't be at the cost of the real work. So I like your question, and you're right that this can't lead to breakdown of communication between men and women, or there being fear of communication between men and women. I think there's some beautiful stuff that happens when men and women come together to do something wonderful. So we've got Rutika here, and she's asking, what are the views of top management when it comes to women diversity? As we can still see, the numbers are too less. So the response to that is that there are organizations that are committed to it. They have as many as 30, 40% women in the workforce. I have worked with an organization that had over 50% women in the workforce. So those are few and far between. I have to say, in most organizations, it's less than 20%. And for the mid-size and small-size organizations, they're still just scraping at the surface of this, not quite understanding what this is about. It seems to be some trend that most people want to follow, rather than understanding the seriousness and the great value and impact that can come out of, that can manifest out of investing in this agenda. So you asked, what are they thinking about? I think there is non-understanding. And for a lot of them, they are bewildered with some of the statistics. So, for example, there is proven research around the imposter syndrome, which is that because of the way you raise women, they sometimes, when they land within organizations and they have positions of responsibility, power, they believe that they need to kind of pretend. They have a situation where they can't believe, where it is that they have actually landed. They believe they need to acquire certain behaviors and not be their authentic selves, and all of this causes a lot of stress. And I do remember when we shared imposter syndrome and the kind of research around imposter syndrome. And by the way, men also struggle with imposter syndrome. So it's not only the women. The women have higher instances of it typically because of the way they've been raised, and because they're kind of ill prepared in many ways for the workplace or the dynamics of the workplace. The workplace is highly, for most people, is highly populated by men. And so for a lot of people, there is a high level of intimidation in terms of wanting to speak to men in authority. It's very easy in transaction analysis terms for those who are from human resources or from psychology, very easy to be able to trapped in the sort of parent-child dynamic. And what happens is, if you play child for too long in your interactions, you never get seen as an adult for leadership positions. And so a lot of those challenges that you have, and I must say that most senior men within organization are, the senior leadership is I think quite sort of bewildered, interested, curious, because they perhaps have not seen diversity and inclusion or this agenda through this lens. Someone said, okay, I've got a question here on your side. Gender inclusion separate from LGBTQ inclusion, but aren't both the same thing? I'm asking if there's a reason. So LGBTQ is about sexual orientation. Yeah. LGBTQ is about sexual orientation, and gender is essentially different gender. And LGBTQ also has gender included, but LGBTQ is typically seen as an agenda which has other set of sort of dynamics and perhaps variables to be able to maneuver, starting with the availability of the talent pool. So therefore, it's typically been classified differently because it's about largely to do with both gender and sexual orientation, but because of the social taboo and the rest of that, the kind of nature of work that needs to be done around that is different. We take one last question, and we've got
Dr. Sujaya. Hi, Dr. Sujaya.
Yes.
Nitin.
Yeah, Nitin. Hi.
So there is Dr. Sumi, who has done a lot of work on diversity and a lot of work on women empowerment. She wanted to actually ask a question. Can she ask a question right now? She's there on the screen. Is that okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Dr. Sumi,
hello, Sujaya. Thank you, Nitin. Congratulations, first of all, for a wonderful presentation. It was really nice. I was doing one study on returning women. And what we found, I along with my student, that there is a need of networking to get into the organization again. And that networking again, what she found was usually with men. So if you network with men in the organization, then chances of your getting hired in the organization are relatively more. So what are your take on that? And how important networking is?
Yeah, so I think that, I have to say that, there is a lot of conversation around within organizations. I'll come to returnee programs in just a bit. I'm talking about women hired inside organizations. And there's a lot of work, conversation, perhaps programs around how do you kind of network within the organization to get ahead. Because it's not common for men and women to be able to kind of in our society. It's not common, and organizations are microcosms of society. So it's not common, except for perhaps when you're in college or otherwise. It's not common for men and women to just kind of chill together, hang together. There are many social and other implications of that. And so, how do you, without looking like you're trying to flirt or you're trying to essentially gain attention, lot of these thoughts in our own heads that women have around not wanting to put themselves out there, of experiencing high levels of embarrassment or shyness, if you want to call it that, to be able to actually go put themselves out there for networking with men. I've heard men tell me, all kinds of senior men tell me all kinds of situations that they've experienced where, embarrassingly, women who don't know how to network actually come and attempt making conversations with senior men. And I think that's all wonderful. It's all wonderful to experiment. It's wonderful to try. It's wonderful to be encouraged and the rest of that. If you don't try enough, you're not going to be able to do it. But I significantly believe that this is part of what needs to be it's the same, it's for men and women need to, and increasingly with the younger generation, the millennials coming in, there ought to be a greater sense of confidence, because networking is not just a challenge for women, it's also a challenge for many men. A lot of men also don't get ahead because they are not able to network enough. So executive presence, your ability to build your reputation within the organization, leaning in for assignments that are most important within organizations are natural platforms to network and to have key people within the organizations know you. So I'm just going to briefly respond to this by saying that careers are made out of your knowledge, your talent, and your ability to build relationships. This rule is the same whether it's for men or women. And I do know that, in the way in which we raise women, and that's what I was talking about earlier, the way in which we raise women, we have not raised them to have the confidence to be able to talk to men of any age group and to be there and have these conversations. And I think there's a great way to be able to combine your talent and your ability to be able to earn the respect of the right people within the organization. I think it's that visibility that leads to greater relationship building. I mean, I could say that for my own career. And I think it's your ability to be able to build relationships with people that you met, you worked with, because you leaned in for tough assignments, because you went out of your way to be able to stretch and do the difficult jobs. You will automatically have a reputation that precedes you, and the right people within the organization will automatically know you, and there will be great respect for what it is that you're doing. But if you're trying to do less, or you're trying to essentially, you're hassled with being able to manage work and life, and as a result of which you also have a hesitation to be able to go out of your way to connect with people within the organization, I'm afraid you'll not find those common meeting grounds if you've not created a reason for why somebody, this is for men and women, if you have not created a reason why somebody who's senior and successful within the organization wants to know you. So lean in, do the tough jobs, be on the assignments and the projects which are really important. You will catch the attention of the right people, and you will be able to naturally network. Open yourself up for relationships. Now, somebody asked, what is the best way and the fastest way to get influential? And the best way and fastest way to get influential is by being the most helpful person around within the organization. Become the go-giver instead of everyone plotting and planning to become the go-getter. So I'm going to encourage everyone here, give more, help more, show more compassion. Everyone will know you and know of your talent. Lend yourself for the toughest assignments. How will people within the organization not you?